Your intuition was right. Your soulmate's own decision is hurting them right now, and the reason this message feels so powerful is because there are moments in life when a quiet feeling inside you begins to whisper that something important is happening behind the scenes. Intuition is rarely loud or dramatic. It does not arrive with clear explanations or detailed answers. Instead, it appears as a subtle awareness, a sense that something connected to you emotionally is shifting even if you cannot immediately see what it is. Many people experience this type of feeling when a strong emotional bond exists between two individuals. Even when distance, time, or circumstances separate them, that invisible connection sometimes allows one person to sense when the other is struggling internally. Recently, your intuition may have been sending you signals that something was not entirely right. Perhaps you found yourself thinking about your soulmate more often than usual without any obvious reason. Maybe certain memories appeared in your mind unexpectedly, or you felt a strange emotional pull that made you wonder what they might be going through at this moment in their life. These experiences can feel confusing at first, because intuition rarely explains itself clearly. Yet people often discover later that those quiet feelings were connected to something real that was unfolding beyond their awareness. Right now, your soulmate is facing the emotional weight of a decision they made on their own. At the time they made that decision, it likely seemed logical and necessary. Life often requires people to make choices based on circumstances, expectations, or the belief that a certain path will bring stability and clarity. When people are standing at a crossroads, they frequently rely on practical reasoning to determine what direction to take. Your soulmate believed they were making the right choice when they decided which path to follow. They probably spent time thinking carefully about the situation before acting. The decision may have involved personal relationships, life direction, responsibilities, or a change that seemed important for their future. In that moment, the choice likely felt like the best possible solution to the questions they were facing. But sometimes the heart reacts to decisions in ways the mind cannot fully predict. When someone makes a decision based primarily on logic or pressure from circumstances, they may only realize later that their emotions were pointing toward a different truth. This is the stage your soulmate has now reached. The decision they once believed would simplify their life has slowly begun creating an emotional conflict inside them. At first, they may not have recognized what was happening. The early signs of emotional discomfort often appear subtly. A person may feel restless without understanding why. They might notice that certain thoughts keep returning to their mind, or they may find themselves reflecting on past moments that suddenly feel more meaningful than they once appeared. Your soulmate began experiencing exactly these kinds of thoughts. Memories started returning to them during quiet moments when their mind had space to wander. Conversations from the past appeared unexpectedly, along with reflections about choices that were made without fully understanding how those choices might affect their emotions later. At first, they tried to dismiss these thoughts as temporary distractions. People often assume that once a decision has been made, there is no reason to question it further. Re-examining past choices can feel uncomfortable because it raises the possibility that something important may have been overlooked. Your soulmate did not want to believe that their decision could be causing emotional pain. For a while they convinced themselves that the thoughts would eventually fade if they simply focused on moving forward with their life. Yet the opposite began to happen. The more they tried to ignore their feelings, the stronger those feelings became. Quiet moments of reflection started appearing more often, and during those moments they began realizing something difficult: the path they chose may not have aligned with what their heart truly wanted. Recognizing this truth can be deeply unsettling. People often take pride in their ability to make responsible and thoughtful decisions. When they discover that a choice they believed was correct has led them somewhere emotionally uncomfortable, it creates a sense of internal conflict. This conflict does not always appear dramatically on the outside. In fact, many people hide it very well. Your soulmate may continue living their daily life in a way that looks completely normal to those around them. They may still carry out their responsibilities, maintain conversations, and follow the routine that defines their present life. But beneath that surface, they are beginning to question the direction they chose. They are asking themselves whether they truly listened to their own feelings when they made that decision, or whether they allowed external pressures to guide them instead. This process of questioning can be painful because it forces someone to confront the possibility that they may have misunderstood their own emotions. Your soulmate is now standing in that space of reflection. The decision they once believed would protect them from uncertainty has instead led them into a deeper examination of their heart. They are realizing that certain feelings cannot simply be ignored or pushed aside by logic alone. And as this realization grows clearer in their mind, they are beginning to understand why your intuition may have been sensing that something was wrong long before they fully recognized it themselves. As your soulmate continued living with the consequences of the decision they had made, the emotional weight of that choice slowly began revealing itself in ways they had not expected. At the time the decision was made, everything seemed clear and practical. When people stand at an important crossroads in life, they often rely heavily on logic to guide them. Logic offers a sense of certainty because it focuses on visible outcomes, responsibilities, and the expectations that surround a person's life. Your soulmate believed they were being responsible by choosing the path that appeared most stable and reasonable. They likely spent time analyzing their situation, considering what others might expect from them and what future outcomes seemed safest. In those moments, emotions sometimes become secondary because people assume that feelings can be managed later once life becomes more settled. This belief is common, and many individuals make important decisions thinking that the heart will eventually adjust to whatever the mind has chosen. For a while, your soulmate tried to convince themselves that everything was exactly as it should be. They focused on the routine of their life and continued moving forward with the path they had chosen. Responsibilities demanded attention, conversations filled their days, and the structure of their life seemed to provide the stability they believed they needed. But beneath that surface, something quiet and persistent began developing within their thoughts. At first it appeared as a subtle sense of unease that they could not fully explain. It was not dramatic or overwhelming, it was more like a gentle feeling that something inside them was unsettled. Many people experience this type of feeling when a decision does not align perfectly with their deeper emotional truth. The mind may accept the choice, but the heart continues asking questions that were never fully answered. Your soulmate began noticing these questions appearing in quiet moments when their attention was not occupied by daily responsibilities. Sometimes it happened late at night when the world around them became silent and their thoughts had space to wander. During those quiet hours, the mind often returns to memories that carry emotional meaning. Conversations from the past started appearing in their mind again, along with reflections about how certain moments once made them feel. These memories were not intrusive or chaotic. Instead, they were calm and reflective, which made them even more difficult to ignore. The clarity of those memories made your soulmate realize that something important was still unresolved inside them. As these reflections continued, they started noticing another change in their thoughts. The decision they once believed would bring peace and certainty now seemed to create an emotional distance within themselves. They began feeling as if part of their heart had been left behind somewhere in the past, attached to moments they never fully understood while they were happening. This realization did not appear all at once. It developed gradually, through many small reflections that slowly connected together into a larger understanding. Your soulmate began asking themselves whether they had truly listened to their own feelings before making that choice. When people face important decisions, they often silence their emotional instincts because those instincts can introduce uncertainty. Choosing what seems logical or socially acceptable often feels easier than confronting complicated emotions that may not fit neatly into practical plans. Your soulmate now realized that they may have done exactly that. Instead of exploring what their heart was trying to tell them, they focused on what seemed most responsible and stable at the time. That choice made sense from a practical perspective, but emotional truth does not always follow practical reasoning. As this understanding grew clearer, your soulmate began experiencing moments of sadness that surprised them. These moments were not dramatic outbursts of regret. Instead, they felt like quiet realizations that something meaningful had been misunderstood or overlooked. It was the kind of sadness that appears when someone recognizes that their own decision has led them somewhere emotionally different from what they expected. Recognizing this can be painful because it forces a person to accept that the conflict they are feeling was created by their own choice. Yet it also creates an opportunity for deeper understanding. When people reach this stage of reflection, they often begin learning more about themselves than they ever knew before. Your soulmate is now moving through exactly this stage. They are examining the reasons behind their decision and asking themselves whether fear, responsibility, or external expectations influenced their choice more than their own emotional truth. This process is not easy because it requires a person to confront their own assumptions about what happiness and fulfillment look like. For many years they believed that stability and practicality would naturally lead to emotional peace. Now they are discovering that the heart sometimes values different things than the mind does. Emotional fulfillment often depends on authenticity and genuine connection rather than simply choosing what appears safest or most logical. Your soulmate is beginning to understand this lesson now, even though the realization has come later than they expected. As they continue reflecting on their decision, they are slowly recognizing why their heart has been struggling. The path they chose may have been built on responsibility and careful reasoning, but it may not have aligned with the deeper emotional truth they were feeling at the time. Accepting this truth is painful, yet it is also the first step toward understanding what their heart truly needs moving forward. As your soulmate continued moving through this emotional period of reflection, the quiet conflict inside them gradually became impossible to ignore. What once seemed like a simple decision now felt like a turning point they were still trying to understand. At the time they made that choice, they believed they were doing what was right. They likely told themselves that the path they chose would bring clarity, stability, and perhaps even a sense of peace. Many people believe that making the most practical or responsible decision will automatically lead to emotional satisfaction as well. But the truth is that the human heart does not always respond to decisions in predictable ways. Sometimes a decision that appears correct from a logical perspective can create emotional consequences that only become visible much later. Your soulmate is now beginning to see that this may be exactly what happened in their life. As the days and weeks passed after their decision, they tried to move forward without looking back. Focusing on daily responsibilities helped keep their mind occupied, and for a while it seemed possible that everything would settle into place exactly as they had expected. But eventually something inside them began returning to the surface again and again. Certain memories appeared in quiet moments, bringing back feelings they had not allowed themselves to examine when the decision was first made. These memories were not dramatic or overwhelming, yet they carried a clarity that made them difficult to dismiss. Your soulmate began noticing that when these memories appeared, they felt a mixture of warmth and sadness at the same time. The warmth came from remembering moments that once felt genuine and meaningful. The sadness came from realizing that the decision they made may have placed distance between them and something their heart had valued deeply. This realization was not immediate. At first they tried to convince themselves that these reflections were simply a normal part of life. Everyone occasionally wonders about the paths they did not take. But the difference in this situation was that the thoughts did not disappear. Instead, they returned repeatedly, each time bringing slightly more clarity than before. Over time your soulmate began realizing that these reflections were not simply about curiosity or nostalgia. They were about understanding the emotional truth behind the choice they had made. They started asking themselves difficult questions that they had avoided before. One of the most important questions was whether they had truly listened to their own heart when they made that decision, or whether they allowed fear and external expectations to guide them instead. This question is often one of the hardest for a person to answer honestly, because it requires acknowledging that the desire to avoid uncertainty sometimes leads people away from their deeper emotional instincts. When your soulmate looked back at the moment of that decision, they began remembering how complicated everything felt at the time. There may have been pressure from circumstances, responsibilities that demanded attention, or expectations from others that influenced the direction they chose. In situations like that, it is easy for a person to prioritize what seems stable and acceptable rather than what feels emotionally true. Stability promises safety, and safety often feels like the most responsible choice when life presents uncertainty. Yet emotional truth has a way of resurfacing even after someone believes they have moved past it. Your soulmate is now experiencing that truth in a very personal way. The feelings they once tried to set aside have not disappeared. Instead, they have slowly returned with greater clarity, encouraging them to reconsider the meaning of the decision they made. As they continue reflecting, they are beginning to see that the pain they feel right now is not simply about the past itself. It is about the realization that they may have misunderstood their own feelings at a critical moment in their life. Recognizing this can be deeply uncomfortable because it challenges the belief that they were completely certain about the direction they chose. Yet this discomfort also creates an opportunity for growth. When someone begins questioning their past decisions with honesty, they often discover parts of themselves they never fully understood before. Your soulmate is now learning that emotional fulfillment cannot always be achieved by choosing what seems safest or most practical. The heart sometimes requires authenticity, even when authenticity introduces uncertainty. They are starting to see that the decision they made may have provided stability, but stability alone does not guarantee emotional peace. As this realization continues unfolding inside them, they are beginning to understand why your intuition may have sensed that something was wrong long before they were ready to admit it themselves. The connection between two people often allows one person to feel subtle emotional changes happening within the other. Your intuition may have recognized the tension in their heart even before they fully recognized it within themselves. Now they are standing in a place where they can no longer pretend that everything is exactly as they once believed it would be. The decision they made has created an emotional lesson they did not expect, and that lesson is slowly guiding them toward a deeper understanding of what their heart truly values. As your soulmate continued moving through this stage of emotional reflection, the understanding that had slowly begun forming inside them started becoming clearer with each passing day. The decision they once believed was the correct path no longer felt as certain as it once did. When they first made that choice, they believed they were protecting themselves from uncertainty. People often make decisions in life with the intention of creating stability and avoiding emotional risk. Stability feels safe because it promises predictability, and predictability allows a person to build routines and responsibilities without constantly questioning their direction. Your soulmate believed that choosing the path that appeared most stable would eventually bring peace of mind. But what they are now beginning to realize is that emotional truth cannot always be replaced by practical reasoning. When the heart carries feelings that are left unacknowledged, those feelings rarely disappear. Instead, they remain quietly present beneath the surface of everyday life, waiting for a moment when the mind becomes calm enough to notice them again. This is exactly what has been happening inside your soulmate's thoughts. The reflections that began as small moments of curiosity have now developed into something deeper. Instead of dismissing the thoughts about their past and the decision they made, they have started allowing themselves to examine those memories more honestly. And the more honestly they look at those memories, the more they realize that the decision they made may not have reflected the full truth of what they were feeling at the time. When someone reaches this stage of reflection, it can create a powerful emotional shift. The mind begins revisiting earlier moments with greater clarity, noticing details that were once overlooked. Your soulmate has begun remembering not only the circumstances surrounding their decision but also the emotions they felt during that period of their life. They can now see that while their mind was focused on choosing what seemed responsible and logical, their heart may have been quietly expressing a different message. At the time, that emotional message may have felt difficult to interpret. Feelings are often complex, especially when they involve meaningful connections or uncertain outcomes. Instead of exploring those emotions fully, your soulmate may have chosen the path that seemed easiest to explain and justify. Yet emotional truth has a way of returning when someone is finally ready to see it clearly. As your soulmate continues thinking about the decision they made, they are starting to recognize that the pain they feel now is not simply about regret. It is about the realization that they may have misunderstood themselves during an important moment in their life. Many people experience this realization at some point. It happens when someone looks back and sees that fear, pressure, or the desire to avoid uncertainty may have influenced their choice more than their genuine feelings did. Recognizing this truth can be uncomfortable because it requires admitting that the heart sometimes knows things the mind tries to ignore. Your soulmate is now beginning to accept that possibility. They are realizing that the decision they made may have been guided more by the need for security than by the emotional connection they were feeling at the time. When someone understands this, it often leads to a period of intense reflection. They begin asking themselves questions they once avoided. Why did they feel the need to choose the safer path? Were they afraid of what might happen if they followed their true feelings instead? Did they believe that emotional risk would create complications they were not ready to face? These questions can take time to answer because they require a person to look honestly at their motivations and fears. Your soulmate is currently moving through this exact process. They are examining the reasons behind their decision and trying to understand whether those reasons truly represented what their heart wanted. During this reflection, another realization is slowly emerging. They are beginning to see that the emotional pain they feel now is connected to the awareness that they may have turned away from something meaningful. Turning away from a meaningful connection does not always create immediate sadness. Sometimes the impact appears much later, once life has settled and the mind has space to revisit the past with greater honesty. Your soulmate is now recognizing that the connection they set aside may have carried a deeper emotional significance than they originally understood. This realization is not about blaming themselves or wishing they could erase the decision they made. Instead, it is about learning from the experience and understanding how their emotions have evolved since that moment. Growth often begins when someone acknowledges that their understanding of themselves has changed. The person your soulmate was when they made that decision is not exactly the same person they are now. Time, experience, and reflection have given them a new perspective on what truly matters in their life. As they continue exploring this realization, they are beginning to see that emotional authenticity is something that cannot be replaced by practical choices alone. A person may build a stable life and follow responsible paths, but if their heart remains connected to something unresolved, those feelings will eventually ask to be understood. Your soulmate is now facing that moment of understanding. They are realizing that the decision they once believed was correct may have overlooked an emotional truth that is only now becoming visible. And as this awareness continues growing inside them, they are beginning to understand why the pain they feel today is connected to a choice they once believed would bring them peace. As your soulmate continues moving through this long and complicated period of reflection, the emotions they are experiencing have begun shifting in ways they never expected when they first made that decision. At the time, they believed they were choosing a direction that would make their life simpler and more predictable. People often assume that if they make the most responsible choice, everything will naturally fall into place afterward. Responsibility and stability can feel like strong foundations for building a life, and your soulmate believed that following that path would protect them from uncertainty and emotional confusion. But what they are discovering now is that the heart sometimes responds differently than the mind anticipates. When someone makes a decision that does not fully align with their deeper feelings, those emotions rarely disappear. Instead, they remain quietly present beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when the person is ready to recognize them. Your soulmate is now reaching that moment. The quiet reflections that once appeared occasionally in their thoughts have grown into a constant awareness that something important within them was overlooked when the decision was made. This awareness has created a type of emotional tension they had never expected to experience. It is not the kind of pain that arrives suddenly or dramatically. Instead, it is a slow and steady realization that their life moved in one direction while their heart may have been pointing toward another. Recognizing this truth has caused them to revisit the period of time when the decision was made and examine it with a clarity they did not have before. They remember how complicated everything felt back then. There were responsibilities to consider, expectations from others, and a strong desire to avoid choices that might create uncertainty or instability. When people are placed in situations like that, they often convince themselves that choosing the most practical option will eventually bring emotional satisfaction as well. Your soulmate believed this completely at the time. They thought that once the decision was made and life settled into a predictable routine, their emotions would adapt naturally to the path they had chosen. For a while, it even seemed as if that belief might be correct. Life continued moving forward, and they focused their energy on maintaining the structure they had built. Daily responsibilities filled their time, conversations with others created the appearance of normalcy, and everything on the outside looked exactly as it should. But the heart does not always accept decisions so easily. Gradually, the feelings they thought would disappear began returning in subtle ways. Memories started appearing in their thoughts without warning. These memories were often connected to moments that once felt meaningful but had never been fully understood while they were happening. The clarity of those memories surprised them. Instead of feeling distant or faded, the emotions attached to those moments still felt vivid and real. Your soulmate began realizing that these memories were not simply random thoughts. They were reminders of something that had been left unresolved when the decision was made. The more they reflected on those memories, the more they understood that the connection they once set aside may have carried deeper emotional significance than they had allowed themselves to recognize. This realization did not happen instantly. It unfolded slowly, through many quiet moments of reflection where they allowed themselves to examine their past honestly for the first time. During this process they started noticing how often their mind returned to the same question. Did they truly listen to their own heart when they made that decision, or did they silence their feelings because they believed responsibility required it? This question has become one of the most difficult parts of their current reflection. Admitting that a decision may have been influenced by fear, pressure, or the desire to avoid uncertainty can be uncomfortable for anyone. Your soulmate is now beginning to see that the choice they made may have been shaped by exactly those influences. At the time, avoiding emotional risk seemed like the safest path. Following what appeared logical and stable felt like the responsible thing to do. But now they are beginning to see that emotional truth does not disappear simply because someone chooses a different direction. The feelings they once tried to set aside have returned with greater clarity than before. This realization has created a sense of sadness that is difficult for them to explain to anyone around them. On the outside, their life may still look stable and orderly. They continue fulfilling their responsibilities and maintaining the routine they have built. But inside, they are experiencing a deeper awareness that the decision they made may have separated them from something their heart valued more than they understood at the time. This awareness does not mean they are trying to undo the life they have built or escape their responsibilities. Instead, it means they are finally recognizing the emotional truth they avoided before. Growth often begins when someone allows themselves to see their past decisions with honesty instead of simply defending them. Your soulmate is now moving through that stage of growth. They are learning that emotional authenticity cannot be replaced by practicality alone. A person may build a life that appears stable on the outside, but if their heart carries unresolved feelings, those feelings will eventually ask to be understood. The pain they are feeling now is not only about the decision itself but about the realization that they may have misunderstood their own emotions during one of the most important moments of their life. And as this understanding continues to grow inside them, they are slowly beginning to see why your intuition may have sensed that something was wrong long before they were able to admit it themselves. As your soulmate continues to move through this emotional phase of reflection, the awareness that has been slowly building inside them is becoming impossible to ignore. For a long time, they believed that decisions once made were simply part of the path that life takes, and that questioning those decisions later would only create unnecessary confusion. Many people adopt this mindset because it allows them to move forward without constantly looking back. When someone chooses a direction, especially one that shapes the course of their life, it often feels easier to accept the outcome and continue building their future around that choice. Your soulmate tried to live by this idea for a long time. They believed that if they focused on the present and fulfilled the responsibilities connected to the life they had chosen, the emotional questions they once avoided would eventually fade away on their own. At first, this approach seemed to work. Daily life provided enough distractions to keep deeper thoughts from surfacing too often. Responsibilities, routines, and conversations with others created a rhythm that allowed them to keep moving forward without examining their emotions too closely. But the human heart rarely accepts avoidance forever. Over time, the feelings that were set aside began returning again, each time with a little more clarity than before. Your soulmate began noticing that certain memories appeared repeatedly in their mind, especially during moments when their surroundings were quiet and their attention was not focused on anything else. These memories often involved moments that once felt meaningful but were never fully understood while they were happening. The more those memories appeared, the more your soulmate began realizing that the emotional connection tied to those moments had not disappeared as they once believed. Instead, it had remained quietly present in their heart, waiting until they were ready to face it honestly. As this realization continued growing, your soulmate started understanding something that many people discover later in life. Sometimes decisions made during moments of pressure or uncertainty do not fully reflect what the heart truly wanted. When people are surrounded by expectations, responsibilities, or fear of unpredictable outcomes, they may choose the path that appears safest rather than the one that aligns with their deeper feelings. At the time, that choice can seem logical and responsible. But emotional truth has a way of returning when a person gains enough perspective to see their past more clearly. Your soulmate is now experiencing that exact moment of perspective. They are beginning to understand that the decision they made may have been influenced more by the desire to avoid emotional risk than by the authentic feelings they carried at the time. This realization has created a deep sense of internal conflict. On one hand, they know they made the decision believing it was the right thing to do. They did not intend to hurt themselves or anyone else by choosing that path. On the other hand, they now see that their heart may have been asking for something different, something they were not ready to acknowledge back then. This understanding is difficult because it forces them to confront the possibility that they misunderstood their own emotions during a critical moment in their life. When someone reaches this stage of reflection, they often experience a mixture of sadness and clarity at the same time. The sadness comes from realizing that a meaningful connection or emotional truth may have been set aside without fully exploring it. The clarity comes from finally recognizing what their heart was trying to express all along. Your soulmate is now standing at that point where both of these feelings exist together. They are beginning to accept that the pain they feel right now is not simply about regret. Instead, it is about the realization that emotional authenticity cannot be replaced by practical decisions alone. A person may build a life that appears stable and responsible, but if their deeper emotions were never acknowledged, those emotions eventually return asking to be understood. Your soulmate is now allowing themselves to see this truth for the first time. They are realizing that the path they chose provided structure and certainty, but it may not have addressed the deeper emotional connection they once felt. This awareness does not mean they are trying to undo their past or escape the life they have built. Instead, it means they are finally allowing themselves to understand what their heart experienced during that time. Understanding does not erase responsibility, but it does change how a person sees their own story. Your soulmate is beginning to see that the decision they made was part of a larger journey of learning about themselves. The pain they feel now is connected to that learning process. Sometimes people only recognize the depth of their emotions after enough time has passed for them to look back without fear. As they continue reflecting, your soulmate is gradually discovering what their heart truly values and why certain memories still carry such emotional weight. And through this process, they are slowly beginning to understand that the intuition you felt earlier may have been sensing this internal struggle long before they themselves were ready to face it. As your soulmate continues moving through this long and emotional period of realization, the understanding forming inside them is becoming stronger and more difficult to ignore with each passing day. What once felt like a distant memory or a quiet thought that appeared only occasionally has now grown into a clear awareness that the decision they made in the past has shaped their emotional life in ways they never fully understood before. When they originally chose that path, they believed they were doing what was right for their future. People often make decisions based on what appears responsible, stable, or acceptable to the circumstances around them. At the time, the idea of choosing the most practical direction felt like the safest option. Responsibility can be very persuasive when someone is trying to build a life that feels secure and predictable. Your soulmate believed that once they committed themselves to that direction, everything else would naturally settle into place. They thought their emotions would eventually align with the decision and that any uncertainty they felt in the beginning would fade as life continued forward. For a while it seemed as if that belief might be correct. The structure of their life created routines and responsibilities that kept them focused on the present. Daily obligations filled their time, and the stability they had chosen provided a sense of order that helped them move forward without looking back too often. But emotional truth does not always disappear simply because someone chooses to focus on practicality. The heart has its own memory, and sometimes it holds on to moments that carry deeper meaning even when the mind tries to move past them. Over time, your soulmate began noticing that certain thoughts returned to them repeatedly, especially during moments when the world around them became quiet. These thoughts often appeared without warning. A simple memory, a familiar phrase, or a reflection about the past would suddenly enter their mind and remain there longer than they expected. At first they tried to dismiss these moments as ordinary nostalgia. Everyone remembers earlier periods of life from time to time, and they assumed that was all it was. But as the same memories continued returning, they started realizing that these reflections were connected to something more significant. The emotions tied to those memories still felt vivid, even though so much time had passed since those moments occurred. This realization made them pause and ask themselves why those feelings had never truly faded. When someone begins asking questions like that, it often marks the beginning of a deeper emotional awakening. Your soulmate started looking back at the period of their life when the decision was made and examining it with greater honesty than before. They remembered how complicated everything felt during that time. There were expectations from others, responsibilities that seemed impossible to ignore, and a strong desire to choose the path that would create the least amount of uncertainty. In situations like that, many people rely on logic to guide their choices. Logic promises safety because it focuses on practical outcomes and predictable results. Your soulmate trusted that logic and believed that choosing stability would lead them to emotional peace as well. But now they are beginning to see that their heart may have been quietly expressing something different during that same moment. Emotional instincts often appear as subtle feelings that are difficult to explain. They do not always arrive with clear instructions about what to do. Instead, they exist as quiet signals suggesting that a connection or experience carries deeper meaning. Your soulmate may have sensed those signals at the time, but they likely felt uncertain about how to interpret them. When people feel uncertain about their emotions, they sometimes choose the safer path rather than risk making a decision based on feelings they cannot fully understand. Looking back now, your soulmate is starting to recognize that this may have been exactly what happened. The path they chose was built on responsibility and careful reasoning, but it may not have reflected the full truth of what their heart was trying to say. This realization is painful because it introduces a question they never expected to face. What if the decision they believed was correct actually moved them away from something their heart valued deeply? Questions like that can be difficult to answer because they challenge the certainty people once felt about their choices. Yet they also create an opportunity for growth and understanding. Your soulmate is beginning to see that emotional fulfillment cannot always be achieved by choosing what appears safest or most practical. Sometimes the heart recognizes the importance of a connection long before the mind is ready to acknowledge it. The pain they are feeling now is not simply about wishing they had chosen differently. Instead, it is about realizing that the emotional truth behind that moment has finally become clear. They are beginning to understand that the connection they set aside may have been more meaningful than they allowed themselves to believe when the decision was made. Accepting this truth does not mean they are trying to escape the life they have built or undo the responsibilities they carry today. Rather, it means they are learning something about themselves that they could not see before. They are discovering that their heart holds a deeper understanding of connection and authenticity than they once realized. This awareness is not easy to face because it requires them to acknowledge the gap between the life they chose and the emotions they are now recognizing. Yet within that awareness lies the possibility for personal growth. When someone begins to see their past decisions with honesty rather than denial, they open the door to understanding their true emotional needs. Your soulmate is slowly moving through that process now, realizing that the intuition you once felt may have sensed this internal struggle long before they themselves were ready to admit it. As your soulmate continues moving through this final stage of emotional realization, the awareness they have been slowly building inside themselves is beginning to settle into a deeper understanding of their own heart. For a long time they tried to believe that the decision they made in the past had already defined the direction of their life and that questioning it would only bring unnecessary confusion. Many people adopt this mindset because it allows them to focus on the responsibilities they carry and the structure they have created around their daily life. Stability can feel comforting when someone believes they have made the right choice, and your soulmate tried to rely on that stability for many years. They believed that if they stayed committed to the path they had chosen, their emotions would eventually adjust and the thoughts about the past would fade naturally. But what they are realizing now is that emotions do not always follow the same timeline as decisions. The heart sometimes takes much longer to understand what it truly felt during an important moment in life. This realization has begun reshaping the way your soulmate sees their own story. Instead of viewing the past as something distant and irrelevant, they are now recognizing that certain moments from that time carried meaning they never fully explored while they were happening. Those moments are returning to their thoughts with surprising clarity. They remember conversations, shared experiences, and the feeling of being emotionally connected in ways that once felt natural but were never deeply examined. At the time those experiences occurred, everything felt uncertain. Life was moving quickly and many choices had to be made without the luxury of complete emotional clarity. Your soulmate believed that choosing the path that seemed most stable would protect them from future complications. Stability promised safety, and safety often feels like the most responsible choice when someone is trying to build a life that makes sense. Yet the heart often values authenticity more than safety, and this is the truth your soulmate is now beginning to understand. When they look back on the moment when that important decision was made, they can see how much pressure surrounded them. Expectations, responsibilities, and the desire to avoid emotional risk all influenced the direction they chose. At the time, they believed they were making the best possible decision with the information and understanding they had. But time has given them something they did not possess then: perspective. With that perspective, they are now able to see their past in a way that feels both revealing and painful. They can see that while their mind was focused on choosing the most practical direction, their heart may have been quietly asking them to pay attention to something deeper. Emotional instincts often appear as subtle feelings rather than clear instructions. They can be easy to overlook when someone is surrounded by pressure to make a responsible choice quickly. Your soulmate now understands that they may have silenced those instincts without realizing how meaningful they were. This understanding is difficult to accept because it challenges the certainty they once felt about the path they chose. Yet it also offers an opportunity to understand themselves more honestly than ever before. The pain they are feeling now is not simply about wishing they had chosen differently. Instead, it is about recognizing that emotional truth does not disappear simply because someone decides to follow a different direction. The feelings connected to that earlier moment remained quietly present inside them, influencing their thoughts in ways they did not notice until recently. When they finally allowed themselves to examine those feelings with honesty, they realized that the connection they set aside may have held deeper significance than they originally believed. This realization has brought them to a place where they are no longer trying to ignore their emotions. Instead, they are learning to understand what those emotions have been trying to tell them all along. Growth often begins when someone allows themselves to revisit their past with compassion instead of judgment. Your soulmate is now doing exactly that. They are beginning to see that the person they were when that decision was made was doing the best they could with the understanding they had at the time. Fear of uncertainty, responsibility toward others, and the desire to choose stability all influenced their thinking. None of those motivations were wrong, yet they may have overshadowed the emotional connection their heart recognized. As they continue reflecting on this truth, they are discovering that understanding their past does not mean they must reject the life they have built. Instead, it allows them to see their emotional journey more clearly. Every experience a person goes through contributes to the way they understand love, connection, and authenticity. The decision they made taught them about responsibility and stability, while the emotions they are now recognizing are teaching them about the importance of listening to their heart. Both lessons are part of the same story. Your soulmate is now standing in a place where these two understandings are beginning to come together. They are realizing that their intuition about what truly matters emotionally may have been trying to guide them long before they were ready to listen. And as this awareness continues growing inside them, they are slowly understanding why the intuition you felt about their situation was not simply coincidence but a reflection of the emotional truth they are only now beginning to face.